She had a PhD in psychology from Columbia University. And in 1955, she appeared on the most popular game show of the time. That was a $64,000 question. And it's kind of become kind of our vernacular, especially for people who were around back in those days. And when someone asks a very tough question, they say, well, that is the $64,000 question now, isn't it? It was very similar to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. You go through a series of questions, getting more and more difficult, and the top level was $64,000. Well, if you adjust that for inflation, that's about $598,000 in 2018 dollars. So, she was the first woman to go all the way to 64,000 on the show. So she became an instant celebrity. And here, this is 1955. I mean, long before cable and satellite TV, you had like maybe 3 channels that you would watch. And this was one of these shows that, especially in the evening, it just seems like the kind of the world just slowed to a crawl while everybody was watching TV. Well, she became almost the face of psychology. She got her own TV show. She wrote a column, so suddenly, and she wrote, several books, but just someone who was on this show, she became the psychologist. She shares stories about her life and says at one point she was just talking to a large group of women and talking about the differences between the way men think and women think. And talking about tendencies. And at one point she says, there is a greater tendency in women than in men to take things personally. And suddenly she heard someone in the third row say, well, I don't. Well, yeah, we all, at one point in our life, or probably many times in our life, take things personally. And that's because we filter it through our view of life. We're the center of our own universe. And hopefully we can get over that. But there's that sense that, we're going to filter through our experiences, through our basic assumptions. All of these things, when we have an experience come into our life, we're trying to make some meaning out of it. What does it mean? And sometimes it doesn't mean anything. It just happened. So we use our 6 senses to take in the world. And it can be easy to react to others' opinions or to outer appearances, rather than finding that center within us, of finding out, okay, what's ours to do in this particular situation. I'm going to have Duncan put up a slide. As you heard, we're going to talk about the 4 agreements. Now, this is a book written by Don Miguel Ruiz. Now, we European Americans, have kind of discovered that our ancestors may have been a little too hasty to suppress and, frankly, slaughter the Native Americans that were here when we arrived. In Mexico, there were Native Mexicans as well, and and now understanding the richness of the spiritual tradition of Native Americans and Native Mexicans, we can see how much it's in alignment, with what we teach here in Unity, and in the New Thought movement in general. He was actually a descendant of shamans down in Mexico, and they would carry forward these esoteric truths, like so many of the esoteric Christian groups would carry this forward until we finally got to this point, especially with the Enlightenment, in the late 1800s and then 1900s, of being recognizing, we can share this with a broader audience now. People aren't living in fear as much as they used to. So let's take a look at the 4 agreements. Let's put up the next slide. It's number 1 is be impeccable with your word. Number 2 is never take anything personally. Number 3 is don't make assumptions. And number 4 is do the best that you can. Now this week I'm going to focus on the first 2, and then next week I'm going to focus on number 3 and 4. And we do have the book available in our newly reopened bookstore. First one, be impeccable with your word. Our words actually create our experience. We send out a vibration from our vocal cords, which can actually affect molecules, out in the world. And this is why it's very, very important for us to watch what we say and our thoughts that create these words, because it's going to create our experience. Of course, like the legend of Dr. Frankenstein and of the Golem, that sense that sometimes we put out what we think we want, and it turns into a monster. And so we use our words to dissolve. I, Bob Euler, now deny, dissolve, and release. Any thoughts, feelings, or fears of whatever it is, ill health, or or whatever the situation is, and then affirm what it is that you do want to create. In the book, Don says, the word is not just a sound or a written symbol. The word is a force. It is the power you have to express and communicate, to think and thereby to create the events in your life. You can speak the word is the most powerful tool a woman, or you can speak. The word is the most powerful tool you have as a human. It is the tool of magic. But like a sword with two edges, your word can create the most beautiful dream, or the word can destroy everything around you. In the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter, 37th verse, Jesus is talking about, how to approach life, how to pray, and he says, let your speech be yea, yea, or nay, nay. Or in other words, let your speech be either yes or no. You say yes to things or you say no to things. And when we have events happen out in the world or in our own personal experience, each day, each of these moments, we have an opportunity to decide what is us and what is not us. And by that I mean, you see something that to you is a horror and you recognize, no, I'm not going to identify with this. This is not the kind of attitude or energy I want in my life. But then there's the flip side. Sometimes you'll see, wow, yes, what a beautiful expression of love. I do embrace that in my life. I am, the idea that I am being that spiritual identity that's at the very core of each of us as individuals. Let me give you some examples, though, about how we can not only shape other people's lives, but shape our own lives. Because a lot of times it's our parents and our authority figures that'll somehow label us along the way. And as we grow to be adults, we recognize we need to let go of those labels and live a life differently. Two sisters, Mary and Debbie. Mary, straight A student, just was really into books and stuff. Debbie, not so much. So the mom would praise Mary for her wonderful scholarship, her report cards, that sort of thing. Where on Debbie, she'd praise how beautiful she is, and making sure that she was ready to go out and find a man in the world, kind of a thing. And so the two women grew up. Debbie did marry early. Mary, though, worked her way through college and got a master's degree, and then she discovered unity. And she heard a lesson, kind of talking like what we're talking about like right now. It's like, okay, what labels, what basic assumptions have I embraced in my life? And she started realizing, wow, Mom just kind of set this out for us. And she had a conversation with Debbie about it, a long conversation. They both realized, yeah, and Debbie's like, yeah, I wanted to go to college, but, people told me I wasn't smart enough. But so Debbie went to college. She ended up getting a master's degree herself. Mary, she recognized, yes, she wanted to have a wonderful companion in her life, in her case, a man. And sure enough, she drew that to her, got married. Eventually, she became a Unity minister, which is how I learned about this story. The author in The Four Agreements shares the story of a woman who came home one night, just tired, headache, and her little girl is singing. And the woman says to the little girl, please don't sing, honey. It makes Mommy's head hurt. And this little girl heard these words, and it changed, how she expressed herself. Well, boy, if my singing makes people's heads hurt, I shouldn't do it. And it wasn't until she became an adult and started to examine these basic assumptions that she realized, no, I do enjoy singing, and my singing doesn't make people, and understanding it was just a momentary thing about what her mother said that she took to heart. The word impeccable, as Tony shared before, means without sin, without blemish, in other words. Of course, as I've described, the word sin, I know for me growing up as a Catholic was a sense of like I've done something, it's a permanent mark on my permanent record. No, the word sin actually comes from an archery term. Back when archery was popular, especially in the Celtics and the English culture, when you would be shooting at a target, you would get a sin when you not only missed the bullseye, you missed the target completely. It's like, okay, you missed the target, but the implication was that, okay, try again. And that's what a sin is. So for impeccability, it's just being willing to recognize that whatever we speak, whatever promises we make, are going to create. So are we willing to stand behind our word? There was an elderly gentleman in Atlanta who was having some financial challenges and recognized that he needed to, borrow $100,000. So he was at his bank talking with his banker, and the banker's pulling out, all of the forms and stuff he'll have to fill out. And then the man realized, in his heart, he's putting out there, it's like, okay, God, what do I need to do here? Is this all necessary? And suddenly he sees someone out in line for the cashier. And he says, if you'll just give me a moment, I need to go talk to that gentleman that I see. And he goes over and talks, so the banker's watching this guy walk up and goes, wow, and he gives him a big hug, and they're talking and all that, and then they go up to the cashier, and then the guy, they say their goodbyes, and the guy comes back to the banker and says, never mind, I don't need it. That guy just gave me $100,000. And the banker's like, will you explain to me what just happened? He said, back about 30 years ago, I lent that man some money. And he said, I'll pay you back. And I said, oh, don't worry about it. Just kind of pay it forward. But if I ever need money, I'll contact you. And he says, and here I was putting out that I needed $100,000, and there he was. So I talked to him. He became a very successful businessman. And he said, yeah, sure. So he just transferred $100,000 from one of his accounts to my account. He was a man of his word, the gentleman said. And are we generally a man of our word or a woman of our word? The Toltecs, who are the native Mexicans, would say, a sin is anything you do that goes against yourself, your true self. We know what's right and we know what's wrong. And if the world is our mirror, if we put out a negative energy, we'll get that energy back multiplied. So, let's express the thoughts, the feelings, the assumptions that we want to experience. In his book, Smile for No Good Reason, psychologist Lee Jampolsky includes a chapter entitled Watch Your Language. And to help his psychology students, he would give them each a list of words that they would read aloud. And each of them would listen to the words and see how they felt. Some of them were called limiting words, others were called labeling words. So let's just see how you feel about this. How do you feel when I say these words? Hopeless, useless, can't, impossible, never, stupid, weak, separate. How does that feel? I don't know, for me, I almost feel like a constriction in the core of my being, in my heart space, my heart chakra. And then after he does that, though, he helps people cleanse the soul. So let's deny, dissolve, and release on all of those words. And he says, how do you feel after you hear these words? Forgive, possible, love, smile, oneness. So you see, the vibrations that we send out from our voice affect every molecule in our own bodies as well. Let's move on to the second agreement. Never take anything personally. It was already touched on in the open of this talk. Yeah, we'll take things personally because our minds are always trying to find meaning to whatever it is that we're experiencing. In a seminar on wills and trusts, a financial planner had been puzzled about something for some time, so he opened up a dialogue with people. And his question was, why is it that most people leave money to their children but don't leave money to their brothers and sisters? And as people talked about, their perceptions of their brothers and sisters, what he found was that if something maybe negative happened between you and your brother when you were like 5 years old, that you were carrying it along all of these years. Yet, we look back at things that we did when we were 5, or for that matter, any age, and we look back and, oh, wow, I certainly could have handled that differently, and, with our brothers and sisters, to, okay, well, I know he didn't mean it or she didn't mean it, but we're carrying that negativity and that resentment forward. And sure enough, when we sit down at the end of our lives and figured out what we want to do with our will and estates, we're excluding them rather than considering whether or not, we want to help support them financially. The greatest teacher of all of these principles, and of course, like I say, these principles or these 4 agreements are in alignment with so many spiritual traditions. But Jesus you'll see constantly in the four Gospels that Jesus doesn't take things personally. You know, he goes back to his hometown to preach, and the people didn't want to hear it. Oh, isn't that snot-nosed little carpenter's kid? You know, what's he doing back here telling us how to live our lives? You know, that sort of a thing. You know, here again, a basic assumption or past experiences. In Matthew 10th chapter, 14th verse, you know, he's telling his disciples, you know, okay, if you're out there sharing these principles with people, if anyone would not receive you or listen to your words, just shake the dust from your feet as you leave that house or town. Shake the dust from your feet and move on. Notice he doesn't say, be sure you give them a piece of your mind. Tell them how you feel that you were so rejected. No, he says, okay, you know, that's cool. You know, if they're not ready to receive it, then that's true for us too. You know, just here again, don't take it personally. In the Gospel of Matthew, 5th chapter, 40th verse, and if anyone would sue you and take your coat, let him have your cloak as well. And of course, back then, you know, they wore the tunics and then the cloak overwards. So if you're giving a person both, you're standing there in your skivvies or worse. But the idea is, don't get into a tug of war. You're pouring energy and power into an adversary rather than just letting it go. Peter denied Jesus 3 times. Judas turned him in for treason. Jesus healed people that other people were avoiding. He didn't take things personally. As he was setting out on a journey, a man ran up and knelt before him and asked him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said to him, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone." And for me, I recognize the worst critic in my life are those voices within me. Those personified authority figures, you know, like the 2 girls, recognizing how their mom had kind of labeled them. And for me, I find I kind of have a committee of various authority figures and stuff that have kind of laid this stuff on me. And when this stuff surfaced in me, now I recognize it's kind of like, oh, yeah, that's a basic assumption I've carried since I was 8 years old. No, that doesn't work for me anymore. I'm willing to let go of that. And then recognize what is the truth about that situation. You know, if it's a healing situation, you know, I embrace the divine idea of perfect health. You know, like Myrtle Fillmore herself, you know, one of our founders. So the 4 agreements. Be impeccable with your word, never take anything personally. And then next week I'll dive a little deeper into don't make assumptions, and then do the best that you can. Our closing story is a 2-minute video from Steve Hartman of the CBS Evening News.